Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. My name's Emily Kyle. I've been practicing for almost 30 years, and we are here in Scottsdale. And today I have the lovely pleasure of having Lori Nissen as our speaker. She's at the Banner Alzheimer's Institute, and she's going to talk about how to have the conversation about driving. So with no more ado, I am going to have her do her presentation. So thank you all so much for joining. All of you, by the way, are on mute, at least I think you are. And if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A or the chat box, and I'll keep my eye on it and interrupt Lori as seems appropriate, or we'll get to the questions at the end. So the floor is yours, Lori.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Emily. It's always fun to have a conversation with you. And I think this is a conversation that's really meaningful to people and families who are living with memory loss. Because really driving can be a challenge. You know, it's certainly a rite of passage. And I like this term. I think AARP might have created it. It's called a driving retirement. And, you know, we know that driving in, many of our communities, in our society is really a symbol of independence and autonomy. So it's a really tough subject to tackle. But when we have somebody who is having challenges with health-related problems, vision problems, and of course with cognitive challenges, driving becomes the source of a real fine balance of giving someone autonomy, but really the safety aspect becomes really the driving force here. So it's really important as family to be proactive. And I know sometimes when people have memory change, sometimes because they are less inhibited, their behavior or reactions seem a bit childlike, but really these are adults we're talking about. So even though we're trying to balance safety, it's really important to remind ourselves to really focus on being respectful and protecting that person's dignity as best we can. It's really difficult when we are caring for somebody or somebody in our life has a cognitive disorder like dementia, and we've known that person for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, or 60 years, and we've communicated with the same way, right? We have these patterns of communication. But when memory fails, that person, their ability to negotiate, their executive functioning, their ability to understand and have insight into these situations doesn't really apply to the conversation. And so it makes the way we have the conversation very different. So I think we want to try to avoid sticking our foot in our mouth as best we can, trying to convince somebody or coerce them or scold them for driving, even threaten them. That isn't really a good way to approach it, although we know that, these kinds of situations put us all on the edge and create really difficult conversations. But we just have to remind ourselves, our person didn't ask for this problem, and neither did we, and we sometimes just have to take a deep breath. So I think, this is actually something my father-in-law used to do many years ago, and he did not have dementia. But every year he would ask my husband to take a drive with him once or twice a year to check in with his driving, which I thought was a really great idea. So I think you can ask or, just kind of ask for a ride or sneak in just to kind of see how that person's doing. That might be a good first way, or maybe you have. And you've had white knuckles and you know that this is really a situation that needs to change, but you've been avoiding it because, honestly, who wouldn't, right? It's a big deal to have a conversation about driving. I've had people in my office at Banner Alzheimer's Institute in Phoenix, where I am today, or sometimes in Sun City, even in Tucson in our office, who say, "You don't understand, there's nothing wrong with my driving. I've been driving since I was 13 years old on the farm." So this is really a difficult transition. You can ask gentle questions. Sometimes people actually will, despite their dementia and maybe limited insight into how progressed their memory changes are, will actually voice that they're afraid of driving or don't want to drive or feel okay but don't want to drive in traffic. Or many aging adults will, self-limit at night. They know that their vision maybe isn't quite the same. And so we can start with those places. So being proactive, asking questions in a gentle way is a good way to do it. Just asking any aging adult. I mean, there are lots of conditions, as I alluded to, that can really affect your driving. I mean, we treat folks who have Alzheimer's and related dementias. We also treat folks with Parkinson's and related movement disorders where they freeze and their muscles and their reaction time is slowed as a result of a movement disorder like Parkinson's disease. All of us are experiencing aging related to cataracts and other vision problems. So, just having an open conversation, if you weren't able to drive, how would we handle it, is a good way to go about it. I often do that when I have the pleasure of working with an identified patient and care partner. I'll often ask about driving. I use the same kind of questioning around care, especially if I have, husband and wife or two partners. I'll say, if either one of you needed care, what would that look like? So just opening those tough discussions, that's often just the first step. Or how would you handle it, or how would we handle it, or what are things that are still really important that we make sure that you get to? Because having a plan is really part of it, right? I mean, if we just remove the vehicle or the keys and the person's living alone and they're stuck at home, that's not going to be a good solution either. So what brings us to these kinds of conversations when we're talking specifically about memory loss? And you'll notice I use kind of the terms interchangeably, but really we think about dementia as an umbrella term. It's when someone is starting to have memory change, memory and thinking changes that can also affect personality and behavior and so on. And underneath it are different types, and Alzheimer's is the most common type. So that's why you hear that term used a lot. So if we have someone who has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or related dementia, as I like to say, here are a few of the warning signs. And actually the Alzheimer's Association, which is a national organization, I took some of these tips from them. They have some great tools as well. Forgetting how to locate familiar places or a destination during the trip. So, your family member who sets out for the Safeway that they've been shopping at for the last 20 years since they retired, and then gets turned around. Failing to observe traffic lights seems like a pretty obvious one. But often when people are driving, they're a bit more fearful, and so they might be driving too slow. And you can see where on a highway system that could be really dangerous. Making bad decisions in traffic. We see that with our winter visitors who maybe don't know their way around so well in Arizona, and they suddenly cut across three lanes of traffic to make a right turn. Inappropriate speed, as we mentioned, or someone who becomes very angry, or you notice that they seem kind of out of it, bewildered, confused. Other things that would lead you to be worried are things like hitting curbs, having trouble lane changing, making errors at intersections, confusing the brake and the gas pedal, which you may have seen on the news. That happens frequently, and people end up, in the front window of a storefront. Returning from something they went to later than usual. So they usually go to have lunch with their buddies at noon, and they come home around 3 and aren't really giving a clear reason as to why it's taken them so long. Maybe they were lost. And then these unexplained dings or dents in the vehicle. So it's not necessarily a good way to ask the person about it, because they might even have no recollection. And it might just lead to an argument to say, hey, there's a dent in the bumper, but maybe a gentle question about it. And if they seem like they don't have any awareness, maybe it's that they're really not remembering, which is also a warning sign that you should keep in mind. So how do you have the conversation? So in my work as a clinical social worker working with families over the last 20-some years, these are the kinds of conversations we often have in support groups and in individual and family counseling sessions. how do we have this conversation and not have it turn into a nightmare? How do we actually affect change while we're maintaining that element of putting the person's dignity forward? And it's this fine balance of these really tricky situations where we want to maintain that person's self-determination, but we have to balance that with safety, because safety is paramount. And that often, to use a pun, that often drives the way we have these conversations when it comes to care or driving. So figuring out the best time to raise the issue is often a good one. If the person's just got home and they were gone quite a while, maybe late afternoon with somebody with dementia, they seem to be more confused, and that's not going to be a good time, but maybe when they're fresh, you start having this conversation. Even if they had a near miss or a ding or a blunder, hopefully no one got hurt. But either way, the scolding and finger pointing doesn't feel good to anybody. So avoid being confrontational. Avoid, blaming that person. If you can actually, and probably have the words a little transposed here, really, you taking the blame could be a good thing. So, saying something like, Emily, I know you're doing a great job of driving, but I haven't been driving very much lately. And, I'm kind of rusty, would love if I can take you around a few times. That often works well in more traditional relationships where the woman hasn't really driven much and she's left it to the spouse, and now he's having problems. So that's a good way to brush up and take over without challenging the person. And then playing upon values. So I like this technique with lots of situations. What is important to the person? And that sometimes can drive the needle of the conversation. So if they're aware that they have memory problems, and I'll be honest, most people I interview, even though they will deny or have no awareness that they have Alzheimer's disease or dementia, even though one of my physician colleagues has diagnosed them, almost every person I ask who has dementia, notice any challenges with your memory? Almost everyone, when I ask it in that simple, direct but gentle way, will say yes. And so then I can have a conversation. Well, it seems like it might be mild, but it's maybe a good time for me to make sure that I'm getting you safely where you need to be. Or if they're aware of it and money speaks to them, or they are an upstanding citizen and they're worried about the legalities of it, saying, our insurance rate is going to go up. If you got in an accident, they probably wouldn't cover it. And we don't know that for sure, but I mean, these are, probable scenarios. And so I think what speaks to the person is important. Safety, being a responsible citizen, it really depends on that person's value system. So I had a situation with some business owners of a home care company, and their mom had dementia, and she was in the hospital. And she was delirious, and she was not seeing that she needed to stay in the hospital. And they were like, we don't know what to do. She wants to leave AMA. Well, she's someone who grew up during the Depression. I knew that. And money was very important to her. So I said, tell her that if she leaves against medical advice, Medicare is not going to pay for her stay, likely. And that worked. That spoke to her. She was not as out of her head as she was with delirium and not feeling well. She got that right away. So set realistic expectations. And this is really hard because in these former conversations we might have, or if we were having a conversation about a different disease state altogether, like cancer, we'd all be cognitively, for the most part, we hope, on the same page. And we would just have an open conversation. We might get upset, but everyone could agree and we could move forward. But that's what's unique about dementia. There's this frontal lobe engagement. So the person often doesn't have good awareness or insight into their limitations. It's not that they're in denial. They really just don't get it. And so don't expect them to get it. If you're expecting your person with dementia to say, you're right, Emily, I can see you have a really large load of caregiver stress, and I think we need to bring in a caregiver. you're going to be waiting a very long time. Similarly, in some situations, the person does get it and they will say, I want to stop driving, but I'll tell you that's not typically the norm. A much larger percentage say, I've never had a problem with driving. It's a sign of independence and get out of my space. In other words, leave me alone. So don't expect them to remember these near misses or blunders, right? One of the hallmarks of dementia is short-term memory loss. So they very likely won't remember the incident. And on the other hand, as hard as these conversations are, we don't want to wait for something bad to happen. So I ask you as a loved one, family member, or friend to ask yourself this question, and I think this is often really telling. Would you trust this person to transport your grandchild or your neighbor's child? And that always seems like it helps people understand really where we are, right? If you wouldn't, then we need to have the conversation. Look for self-limiting behavior and use your primary care doctor or your dementia specialist as a guide. Is it okay if this person drives during the day? Those kinds of things. And when you have concerns, raise them with the primary provider or specialist in front of the person, or if it's a really tricky subject, outside of the session. Maybe send them a note in the portal or ahead of time so they are aware of what's going on and can kind of help be the bad guy, if you will. Expect resistance. Don't expect the person's going to go, okay, that sounds great, no problem, here are my keys. It doesn't typically happen like that. So expect for people to be upset, expect for them to be tearful, and respond to the emotion. You're right, I'm sorry, this really stings. Try to show some empathy. Like, imagine if I told Emily today at the office that I was taking the keys to her SUV and she wouldn't be driving home. I mean, imagine what that would feel like to her. So try to lead with empathy, lead with trying to understand how significant this conversation is. Think about how the memory loss has affected their thinking, and think about how memory loss affects our relationship and roles, right? It's complicated, right? There's lots of role changes that happen. Like, I'm the daughter and I'm having a conversation with my mom, but I feel more like the parents sometimes. So really think about how those things play out and plan your conversation before you have it. And you might have to have more than one. And then don't wait for the person to say, all right. Sometimes you just have to move forward on plans. So focus on safety. Put the onus on you. I need to make sure you're safe. Like, I want to make sure other people are safe. I care about you and I don't want to wait until something bad happens. And then blame other elements. So if the person isn't able to have insight or take any responsibility, then try to place the blame elsewhere. There are so many crazy drivers here right now. I mean, we see so many accidents on the news that I'm really trying to be proactive here. It's snowbird season. We have lots of winter visitors. This might be a good time because the traffic is insane. Poor weather conditions, increased road construction. You could maybe not tell the whole truth about insurance and, explain that, once you hit a certain age, your insurance rate doubles. Or maybe it's something else. I had a friend who was a social worker and she was having this conversation with her dad, and her dad had dementia and had no awareness. And even though she was a social worker, she was really struggling with this conversation. But her dad was starting to have macular degeneration. So dementia never came up. They focused on his vision and how that could be really dangerous, and really, really focused on that angle. Other things that could speak to somebody based on their values: liability of an accident, car damage, license revocation, other legal implications that I don't know if you want to touch upon now or later, Emily, but I think sometimes, especially an older generation now, does have respect for, for the law, and we want to make sure we're abiding by it. And if there is a concern that there may be consequences, that could be an angle to take. So I'm a big advocate of using your medical provider. As the care partner, your job is to always align with your person as best you can. So stepping out of the role of bad person is always the best route to go. So speak with the medical provider about your concerns. As I mentioned, pass them a note, call ahead and talk to the nurse, that is one good thing about the portal is you can send messages if you register for the portal of many health organizations. You could schedule a driving assessment. Like if you're really worried, you could schedule a driving assessment with one of these great companies that like Driving Solutions, or there are many other across the nation. Or if you're really worried, you might want to just start with a DMV. I mean, if there's a driving test and it doesn't go well, that could end that situation right there. If you want to take a little more subtle approach, anyone can fill out a driver condition report in Arizona. Anyone can complete a report. In fact, before I joined Banner, I was in a private practice and I was seeing a gentleman who had Parkinson's disease. And apparently he went to church on a very regular basis. And apparently somebody at church had seen him leaving the parking lot and filled out one of these driver condition reports because they were very worried. And he got a letter in the mail and he had to go and take a driving test and he flunked, which was horrible. But it was, he had been contemplating a move to independent living and or assisted. He really shouldn't have been living by himself. It was really struggling with that decision. So it kind of helped make those puzzle pieces fall into place, because now that he was going to be without a car, it was more palatable to make a move to a community that would have a van and activities and meals on the same place. Again, use your medical provider, as the person who's going to follow through on it. Any medical provider can voluntarily report a patient to the MVD who has a medical or psychological condition that in that person's opinion could significantly impair that person's ability to safely operate a motor vehicle. And our physicians do that regularly. They try to talk with the person, get the caregiver involved, get someone to take action first. But if they don't, and they're very worried about it, they will fill out a driver condition report, or in some cases, the medical provider version.
And your suggestion, Lori, on that last slide, particularly when we have partners, to offer for the caregiving partner to say, well, I'll take the test also. Let's both get assessed.
Absolutely.
And that has made a huge difference that when clients report that to us as a way to get that person to then do the test, because it's not about them. They can just say, well, you know what, we're both X years old. We should just have this done. And then they're like, well, if you're doing it, I'll do it also.
That's great. And hopefully the well spouse passes.
Well, if they don't, I guess they'll both have to come up with a new solution, but everybody will remain safe.
We do that even with, we have a brain health check-in program at one of our institutes that's done when people just want to do check into their brain without actually having a formal assessment. And we'll also have dyads do that, encourage them, if they can't get their person into the memory clinic, to just do a check-in and have us both do it. Or the same thing with going to a specialist, you could say, hey, we're both, 72. I know our risk of memory loss as we age gets higher, and let's both do it. So I think that partnership can go a long way in a lot of those tricky situations. So if there are other family members to help you out, this is a great way to partner up. Because I always say, these complex situations, it's better to have support if we can. And it doesn't always happen that way, right? Weddings, funerals, and dementia bring out the best and worst in families. But we can use this as an opportunity to try to engage family members, because often the care falls on one person. But this is a great way to get other family members involved in the conversation and finding solutions, even if they don't live in town. Share facts about your concerns, get on the same page. It's not about ganging up, but it's about having a movement where we all come together and we're all worried about you. And we really want to find a solution here. We're here to support you. use a kind but firm approach, right? Because if we say, are you willing to give up driving? And the person says no, then we're backed into a corner. And then sometimes there are family members who have their own agenda. So we were talking about, if two people take the driving test, there was a couple that I worked with in our Sun City office a number of years ago, and the husband was driving and he was in moderate stage dementia. It was pretty frightening. But his wife had macular degeneration. And so she was really reluctant to take away the keys because if he didn't drive, they went nowhere. So we had to involve other members of the family and have this conversation. Like, I understand your reluctance, but let's find a solution here. And they're another group that ended up moving into a community because that way they had, she would have support as he was now in the moderate stage, moving to the advanced stage, and was probably going to need more caregiver help in assisted living or memory care. And then they had activities and meals and, a van, a transportation, all in the same campus. So, it may be a more a trigger to a move, but if it benefits everyone and we find a solution and we can get out of this risky behavior, then that is important. So this is my idea of, sometimes one person in the family, maybe it's the adult son, I don't know, but maybe one person has more influence and can really be the one that's sharing this message. But it's good if you have more than one family member who is joining this conversation and supporting one another. And then, group problem solving can really offer a creative approach, right? Because it's not just about taking the keys. Now we've got to find solutions to getting to that person to the things that they love, like if they go to church or temple, or they play bingo, or doctor's appointments, or socialization, games, recreation. Those things are still important to keep that. We don't want to punish them. We want to find ways to continue with their routine as best we can, but we have to have a plan in place. So talk about these role changes, remind them not to scold or become defensive with the person. Use this added brain power to try to find solutions and alternatives. And then just continue to remember that we really want to be respectful as we can in these conversations. We want to lead with support. We want to remember what it feels like to be in that person's shoes. And we want to try to get other family members on the same page. Because sometimes when you're the one who is really engaged and involved with your person and other family members aren't, they might think that you're overdoing it or overreacting. So not having this conversation with the person right away, but having these other conversations to really share awareness of what's going on, maybe talking about these blunders. And again, you're not doing it behind the person's back to lie to them or to be just, to be mean, but you're also doing it to protect their dignity and just try to get people on the same page so that you can support one another with these really difficult decisions and conversations. So be part of the solution, try to use compassion, look for events that are available for the person to participate in, because again, it's a multifaceted decision, right? We still want the person to have quality of life. We want them to continue with their book club or their senior center activities, or getting to grandkids games, or volunteering, whatever that is. So that takes some thought. I think technology has made that easier in some ways with rideshare and being able to set up remote rides for people if they're safe enough, you think, to be alone in a car like an Uber or a Lyft. But also try to again, this is a good time to ask for help. We're Americans, so we don't do that. We're not used to asking for help. We believe that we can take care of every problem ourselves, and that's not true. Asking for help is actually a sign of strength, not a weakness. So look for resources, make deals with neighbors. Maybe gas prices are a little bit high, so maybe the neighbor is willing to take your person to some of their activities. Maybe they go to some activities together. Maybe they already go to the market and would be willing to take that person. maybe you can, get them a gift card for gas or something like that to just reciprocate, since, you think about the money that you were spending maybe on that person's vehicle and insurance and gas. Maybe some of those resources could be used for ride share, or looking into senior rides. There are lots of programs in different counties that can help people get to appointments. The VA, for example, will pay for rides to VA medical appointments. Some programs, like where we are in the Phoenix metro area, there are some programs in the East Valley that will take people where they need to go. There's programs in the West Valley. So try to be resourceful. I think that's one of the benefits of technology now. You can really more easily locate resources and have opportunities for job sharing, for ride sharing, and for congregate rides. I mean, there's even some advances with self-driving vehicles. There's some pilot projects, one here in Arizona and in California, where they're using self-driving vehicles as a pilot project to take people who are aging adults who can no longer drive for whatever reason, taking them to appointments and activities. And then, just try to find solutions as best you can. You're human, you're going to make mistakes. There isn't a perfect answer, but once we've made the decision that driving is dangerous, we don't want to wait for something really bad to happen where we'll feel terrible if that person was hurt or someone else was. So make it a priority. And then beware of the golf cart. So I started my career with Banner in Sun City almost 10 years ago. And I was bewildered that people would drive golf carts on a very busy street like Thunderbird and Banner. And that's what people do in retirement communities. And so when people say, oh, you can't drive, they're like, oh, don't worry, I've got my golf cart. That is not okay. It's probably not even legal, and I'll let Emily chime in if she'd like to, but still that person has to have the same abilities they would in a vehicle. And if those abilities are impaired, it doesn't translate well into a golf cart. In fact, I think it's even more dangerous, because if you get hit in a golf cart, that's probably the end of it. So anything you want to add to that related to the golf cart, or other things you think of related to your lens in driving, Emily?
Yeah, so I completely agree. I think if somebody doesn't have the ability to maneuver the vehicle, they're not going to understand the street signs. They're not going to stop for pedestrians. Whatever's going on cognitively is the same. We've also had situations where people just stop, whether they're in the car or the golf cart. They are so confused and so overwhelmed by all the stimulation that's going on that they literally just stop the car. And then eventually the police are called to figure out what's going on. Why is this person in the middle of the intersection? And again, I think, as Lori said, when folks have short-term memory loss, they're going to say, well, the light just hadn't turned green yet. I was fine. So getting those police reports, though, and having them maybe make a report to say that there's an issue with this person cognitively to keep their license. Yeah, and blame the doctor for everything. It's an easy out to say, well, the doctor told us this, the doctor told us that. I think it will become less useful for those of us who are of a different generation, where we think, well, the doctor doesn't know everything and I need a second or third opinion. But for right now, I think that works pretty well. One of the questions that was on the chat was whether the report to the DMV is anonymous. And my understanding is that it is. So can you confirm that, Lori?
Yes, and thank you. That's a great question. Yes, it is. And just to add to what Emily is saying too about, a change in memory, it's not just about memory, right? So when you have a cognitive disorder, your judgment's impaired. You're thinking more slowly, so you can't react as quickly. You may have visual spatial changes as a result. So there are lots of factors that are affecting the driving, along with with memory and thinking. So it's really a multifaceted problem, and really, you see those silver alerts, and that's often what's happened is the person has, not always, I mean, they're also for people who are disabled, but often it's an older adult who has set out for the same place they always go. And, a few hours later, they've left Phoenix Metro and they end up in Yuma. So these really are tricky situations, but important situations for us to address.
Maybe not a legal question, but I would say that getting ID for your person who has at the beginning stages, because then they're used to it. They have their medical alert bracelet, which, the EMTs or somebody else are going to look for, that says, I have a memory impairment. This is my contact information, whatever that might be. Getting people used to things before it gets to the point where they're very resistive to any change, anything new. The answer is always no. I say, I'm not sure why babies, the first word they learn is no instead of yes, but we seem to revert to that as we age as well. We're just overwhelmed and can't figure out the solution. So it's easiest to just say no. So any kind of ID bracelet so we can get them back to where they need to be, I find really, really helpful for families.
That's such a great suggestion. I'm going to add that to my list. I like it. Because I think too, that's often where, when you get in these tricky situations where you've tried everything that hasn't worked, if the person already has an ID, maybe you conveniently lose the driver's license. And then you just keep telling them, oh, you got it. Don't worry about it. I'll make an appointment at the DMV, and you just keep putting the person off from a safety perspective. So
yeah,
that's such a good suggestion.
The other thing is that I always think it's a great idea to put the healthcare power of attorney in the glove box of the car. So when that person is looking for their registration and their proof of insurance, maybe that power of attorney is there. And so then they would see, oh, this is the contact information for the person who's supposed to help make decisions. So if they don't have ID on them, that's another way to get that information in front of the an EMT or somebody else who's trying to be helpful.
Oh, that's a great idea. I've heard caregivers say they do that in case they have to make an ER visit. But
oh, yes.
Another important purpose.
Yeah. So I just switch it up. So yes, you should have your own healthcare power of attorney in your own glove box, but maybe for your parent or whoever you're the agent for, you put theirs in their glove box. So
I guess you just gave me something to put on my to-do list. So I think just, the best we can plan ahead, because dementia throws us lots of curveballs, but if there are things we can do to plan ahead, the suggestions that Emily made are excellent. Thinking about how we can use resources to make sure that the person isn't stuck and they can get to where they need to go. Whether you look at other options, just like when you end up taking over the person's finances, there's lots of great ways to bill pay ahead of time, or to do an automatic withdrawal for basic bills like the gas or the electricity. There's lots of great resources, especially I think we're calling it post-pandemic. With COVID, there's so many great resources now that weren't available for delivery or pickup, like pharmacy, grocery, supplies. Medications can be delivered now from the pharmacy. All those things that we can offload, because I know as a care partner, you're already taking on a lot. So if there are things we can simplify and make easy, related to groceries, if the person, orders the same kind of groceries every week, maybe the neighbor could take them, or maybe we can just have a standing order every week for certain supplies. In some instances, like, with Amazon, there are actually benefits to subscribing. You get little discounts here and there on certain things that the person might need, like toilet paper. And then I think this is a good time if you're thinking about some kind of assisted environment. This can often be the best time in some of those examples that I gave, where people decide that they are going to make a move now when they maybe weren't going to make it until later. And that can be really beneficial, as Emily said, in talking about the ID. The same thing with a move. I mean, then the person, the better their memory is, it'll be harder for them emotionally, certainly, but they can adjust, they can take more advantage of some of the activities. If they have a partner that's going with them, it can go smoothly for both people. And then, that could be a solution that's offered, to have that transportation and those community events, activities, and meals available. So at Banner, we like to say, no one's ever won an argument with somebody with Alzheimer's or related dementia, because the person with Alzheimer's disease, as we pointed out, it really affects their ability to communicate, understand, and have good insight. One of the first questions I often ask people when I get to see them in my office, I'm thinking about a woman I interviewed this week on Monday, is, so what's your typical day like, Joanne? She started telling me about her typical day, and her husband and daughter were next to her going, she hasn't had a typical day like that in a long time. And again, it's not that she's lying, but her short-term memory is impaired. And, 5 years ago, that was her routine, but it's not anymore. So just remembering that the person isn't trying to be difficult. We didn't ask for this. And the disease affects their ability to just come up to you and tell you that they really think they should give up driving. So we have to really use different tactics to have the same conversation in a different way. So you have to adapt and adjust the way you communicate. You want to avoid correcting them. You don't want to scold or coerce the person. You don't want to convince them or even try to reason with them. So what does that look like? So remember that what they're telling you is very true to them. So when this person was telling me that she gets up every day at 9, she has breakfast, she goes to the gym, she comes home, she has lunch, she has 3 afternoon activities at the senior center that she drives to, that hadn't happened in quite a long time, but it was very real and very true for her. So when the person says, I hate that stupid doctor, that person's never driven with me, or they don't know what I'm like. I've never had an accident in my whole life. I've got a lot of people say that to me. You're right. The doctor's a jerk. I would feel the same way. But this person, the doctor, nurse practitioner, PA, whoever this person is the authority here. And we really have to follow their directions. They're looking out for our best interests. And I'm terribly sorry. This is awful. I see why you're upset, but we've worked out a plan to make sure that you get where you need to go. We're going to try to do our best to make this simple for you. We don't want it to affect your day-to-day life. We still want you to enjoy yourself. And we're going to do the best we can together. And then don't wait for, to have this long conversation, right? Don't over-explain yourself. Don't talk for an hour about it. Because with short-term memory loss, the person's likely not going to remember the next day. And you'll get into this whole spiel again. And that's not really healthy for anybody. So then stop the conversation, particularly if it's someone that is really getting upset. Say, well, thank you for listening to me. And we've got a plan. We'll talk about it another time. And, by the way, we said we're going to watch that Western at 1 o'clock. And so let's go pop some popcorn. We'll head into the den and we'll go have our card game or have our dessert or watch the movie or whatever it is, and change the subject and move forward. So when the going gets tough, be prepared for that person to be upset. Be patient, be firm, but be gentle. So I like to call it being positively directed. So like if you want your person to take a walk with you every day, if you ask them, hey, do you want to take a walk? That veil of dementia apathy is all over them and they're going to say no. But if you say, you know what, it's 9 o'clock, the temperature is actually finally nice here in Arizona, I want to take a walk, why don't you join me? So I think that's what you have to do, is use that positively directive behavior. I know the doctor said we really shouldn't be driving. I haven't driven in a while, so let me take this one. Acknowledge the pain of this change and appeal to that person's desire to act responsibly. Remember what their value is, whether it's that they don't want to get charged more for insurance, they want to align with the doctor says, they're afraid of the police. And then don't blame yourself. Because I know these conversations are hard. I had one gentleman who was referred to me by his neurologist a number of years ago, and he came to see me like 4 different times. Even though he couldn't remember a lot, some of these traumatic things get stuck, and he was fixated on driving. And he had 2 driving evaluations, and it didn't make any difference. And he was making his wife miserable. So she finally just had to disable the car, and it was broken. And he was so kind of a difficult guy before dementia. And a lot of time in the house, I instructed her to do her cleaning and other things with headphones. He would start to complain about the driving, just so that she could try to avoid being upset. Say, oh, I'm sorry, honey, I'm doing the laundry and I've got my classical music on. I can't hear you. So it was really a difficult situation. So give yourself some grace, do the best you can, involve professionals. If you go to support group, talk about this in a support group. I'm an expert, but there are lots of family experts who have creative ideas I haven't even thought of that have worked for them. So rely on other people to help you through this difficult time. Know that one conversation might be enough, but try to keep those conversations short and simple. If things escalate, end the conversation. And again, don't wait for them to agree. Start moving forward on plans. And then look for ways to distract from driving. You know, I need the practice, or I'm sorry you're upset. Let's change the subject. If the person continually wants to talk about it, try to redirect to another topic. Apologize. Apologies go a very long way with dementia, even if you've done absolutely nothing wrong. Just apologize. And then be prepared also. I was talking with a caregiver about this yesterday. Her husband has always been in charge, and she has finally gotten him to let her drive, but he complains about her driving the entire time. So she sometimes turns the hearing aid in her right ear closest to him down. Sometimes she turns up the music. She's found ways to try to dodge some of that anger that gets thrusted at her and change the subject. And sometimes she just looks at him and says, I'm sorry, I'm doing the very best I can. And then looks back and drives to get them where they need to go. Structure the day with activities to distract the person from obsessing about driving. Adult day programming is phenomenal. I don't like the word adult daycare. So when my power of attorney tells me I need that, I'm going to say no and hell no. But if you talk to me about a social club or a senior activity, or instead of an assisted living, you know, a resort for 55 and older, I'd be more on board. So think about how semantics play into this conversation, and many typical conversations with somebody with dementia. Same thing with volunteering. If you hire a driver, call that person a volunteer. If you need to bring care into the home to get the person where they need to go and also supervise and help out with other things, call the person an assistant. I don't want to go to an adult daycare, and I certainly do not want a caregiver to take care of me, but I'm a director. So if you told me that you got me an assistant, I might buy it. So think about how language plays into getting the person on board as best you can. Last resort, some people are just really tough. I worked with a lady who I used to see her in home. I was a consultant before I joined Banner. She would not let a caregiver in the house. She was very savvy. She'd see that car that drove up that said home care assistance, and she wouldn't answer the door. And so we had to not tell the whole truth to her at one point. It was becoming summer and her air conditioning was starting to flake a little bit. Well, we basically had it disabled, and you know, just explained to her that the air conditioner was 30 years old, that it was going to take us a long time to find that part, and that she was moving into a senior resort just as respite. And it took her quite a while to settle in. I'm not going to make it sound glamorous, but she did, and we made it happen. So sometimes you have to go to extreme measures, like sending the car to the auto shop to be repaired. And when the person asks about it, you say, you know what, you're right. Those people are a bunch of idiots. I am going to call and follow up with the automotive group today, and I'm going to get it straightened out. And then again, you change the subject. I had one woman whose husband was used to getting up at 6 a.m. every day. He was an executive and getting into the car, and he was pretty impaired. She gave him a different set of keys. And every day he'd walk in and say, gosh darn it, these are the wrong keys. And she'd go, oh my God, I think I lost them, but I made you some breakfast. So while I'm looking, sit down and have some breakfast. Sometimes you have to disable the car, or create a disability, like, removing the battery, or in the old days when people used clubs, put a club on the car and say that you lost the key, have it towed, blame the automotive shop, and remove the trigger. These are cart conversations, and sometimes it's adult children who still feel like the child, and they'll move the person to assisted living, and the person says they want their car on the campus. And then what happens is they see it outside all the time, or they see it in their garage at home all the time, and it triggers them. So get rid of the trigger if that causes the person to think and ask about it. And don't think a sticky note on the garage door saying you can't drive is going to be useful. We've never found that trick to work well. Look to the professionals to help. You don't want to be in this alone. Your primary provider, your specialist, a nurse, a counselor, even clergy, if that person respects them, can really help sometimes in these difficult situations, help with these challenges. Have the doctor write an order that says you can't drive, or a prescription. And even though that's not going to convince the person, it might be a good reminder as we're having this conversation. Yes, I know you're right, but the doctor gave me a prescription and sent a letter into the DMV, so we just can't. You're totally right. This is terrible. I totally get it, but I have to follow what the doctor or the provider is saying. So learn strategies from experts. There are some great materials out there that I'm going to share with you. Get caregiver support. We think we can do everything alone, but being part of a support group, or connecting with a social worker, or somebody from the Alzheimer's Association, or social worker or nurse from your medical practice, to get support in these really difficult situations is going to be really important. If the person is higher functioning, they can't drive, but they have a lot of stress, and they do have some awareness into these losses, an early stage support group for them can be helpful. And sometimes there are early stage support groups that have a care partner support group at the same time, same place, but different rooms. A lot of memory cafes often offer that particular formula as well, which will help you get support and have your person get support for themselves, or at least participate in life enrichment, life engagement while you're there, so that you can both get help in different ways. So just a few resources that I think can be really helpful if you're looking for additional resources and tools for your toolbox. The Alzheimer's Association does have some information on driving. AARP does as well. The Hartford is kind of like the good standby that talks about some of these conversations we're talking about. And the Alzheimer's Association has a 24-hour helpline. You can call them anytime. If your loved one is connected with the VA also now has a caregiver support line that can be accessed from the website, that can help you maybe through some tricky situations. And the Area Agency on Aging, I just put the one for Maricopa County, which is where I happen to be sitting today, but there is an Area Agency on Aging in just about every community across the United States. Sometimes they're called Department on Aging, but they often have incredible resources for caregivers and tools and support for people living with dementia and having these tough conversations. And we have some additional resources. We do a great newsletter if that's helpful. We have a great podcast. Thank you for being a guest on our podcast, Emily. There's lots of opportunities for you. You can participate in any of our classes, events, support groups without being a patient or a family of Banner. And so we welcome you to look for more resources just to help support and guide you through these long journeys.
So excellent. Thank you so much, Lori. And I was one of the folks who was a participant, reminded us of the Dementia Untangled, which not to toot my horn, but the podcasts they're really great. And I understand there is another one on driving up there. So they're really useful. We send clients to review those all the time. One thing I will say that I hear a lot from parents, from the children about their parents, is they just need to try harder. And I think it's really important for people to understand that maybe they're just doing the best that they can, What makes dementia so hard is that we can't see a change. So you break your arm, you're in a cast. We understand you can't use your hand to reach and help us. But brain injury and dementia, I think that just makes it really hard because they look like our person. They just aren't acting like our person. So
Yeah, a wise caregiver once said to me, whenever I'm hitting a wall in a relationship with my partner at work or with my aging of parents, one of her parents had Parkinson's disease and the other had Alzheimer's disease, I redefine my expectations. And I think that's wise advice, because sometimes we get in our own way unknowingly, because it's really hard to accept these changes and the progression. And I know we've talked even in your webinar series, Emily, about this ambiguous loss. You may not realize it until you're hitting your head against a wall, but you might be grieving the person as they once were and expecting that they're going to perform at the same level that they did in a conversation or an action when they're just not capable of it.
well, super, super helpful information as always. So thank you so much for spending an hour with us today. And for those of you who are attendees and asking questions throughout, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. We hope to see you at our next webinar. And everybody stay safe and enjoy the weather as it starts to calm down a little bit and be a little bit more palatable. So everybody take care. Thank you again, Emily Kile at the Kile Law Firm. Take care.